Okay, so I've got title slide on this machine. Let's give it a moment to wait to load.
It's showing up here. I think we got over that.
All right,
Thanks,
so now we've got an
everyone.
about slide. Okay, yeah, so sorry about that. That was actually my fault. I have multiple machines going here, joined to the WebEx, and I was advancing the slides on the wrong one. Go figure. So real quick, so about me, I am a Chicago-based A&E exchange consultant, working mostly these days with education customers, but I certainly come from a background working with really large-scale enterprise customers. So you know, coming from both angles, and I think that adds a interesting dynamic. I've been a Microsoft MVP for AD since 2003, so about 6 years now. And finally, I am the author of Active Directory 4th Edition from O'Reilly, which is one of the reasons they have me here. I'm sure many of you have heard about it, and I'm hoping that if you haven't after this presentation, you might consider taking a look at it. And finally, feel free to email me. Those are my email addresses, brian@briandesmond.com or brian.desmond@marantechnology.com. And also my website and blog, briandesmond.com. There's an email link there. Love to hear from you. And I'm going to turn it over to Laura for a minute.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian, and thanks to everyone at O'Reilly as well for having me. Much like Brian, I come from a long-standing AD background. I've been working on Microsoft Directory services since the NT4 days and made the upgrades to 2000, 2003, 2008 AD as they've come along. For those of you familiar with the Microsoft Certified Master Program, I'm about one of maybe 40 certified masters in Active Directory at the moment, and I also teach a portion of that curriculum out in Redmond. Again, similar to Brian, I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2004, which is right around the time that Brian and I met, so he and I have known each other a goodly number of years by this point. I'm based in the Philadelphia area, and I know I've seen at least a few people on the participants list who I ran into at the Philly.net Code Campus that we organized this past weekend. I know I see Mike Klein there. I think Matt Casey's lurking as well. So very good to have you all here. I'm a senior architect for my day job with the Oxford Computer Group. We're an identity management consultancy with offices in North America, Great Britain, Germany, and the Netherlands. We specialize in the various products in the Microsoft Identity and Access Management stack, so Active Directory, AD Federated Services, Identity Lifecycle Manager, you know, someday the new version will ship, PKI, and Certificate Lifecycle Manager. And as you can see, I'm also the author of the AD Cookbook, so the sibling title to Brian's Active Directory text. I've been very happy to be attached to that project for both the second and the third editions of the book. You can see my contact information and my blog down there on the bottom. And with that, I'll thank everyone again for coming, and I'll turn it over to Brian to start things off.
Okay. So before I go forward, here's a quick agenda of what I want to talk about. A couple of housekeeping items I should have addressed at the beginning. As far as will slides be available, yes, I will post those on my website, briandesmond.com, and I believe Laura would be happy to link to those as well from her website and blog. As far as questions go, we really want to make this interactive. Post questions in the chat window, and I think what we'll do is if they're about the topic that we're talking about, we'll take a pause in between topics, and otherwise at the end we'll address any and all AD questions or whatever comes up, and we will also post a summary of all those Q&As along with the deck on mine and Laura's website, especially if we run out of time before we get a chance to address all the questions. But I certainly think we'll endeavor to get everything answered here. So with that stuff out of the way, let's jump in. So probably the most publicized feature about AD right now in R2 is the recycle bin, which is for many people going to be a big saver when something bad happens. I know I've worked with a lot of customers that have accidentally deleted an OU or a computer or a bunch of users or something and taken a whole lot of things down, and then it's really complicated to bring all that back. I mean, your options basically are to recreate all the objects, reanimate the tombstones, and not get a lot of attributes back, like passwords, for example, or to do an authoritative restore, which does require downtime for servers, and it's certainly not a cakewalk to get that done, even if you've practiced it before. So new in R2 is the recycle bin, and the primary thing here is that we can restore a deleted object and all its attributes for a configurable period of time. The important thing here is that this is an object-level restore, kind of like the recycle bin in Windows Explorer. So let's say, for example, you delete one attribute on all the objects in your domain, maybe the company attribute or the manager attribute. The recycle bin is not going to help you there. But on the other hand, if let's say you delete the North America OU, you can easily bring that back with the recycle bin without any sort of restore from tape or another form of backup. So if we look at what the life cycle of an object is today in AAD with Windows 2000, 2003, 2008, there's three states that it's in. There's a live object, which is your normal state when it's in AAD, you're using it, and then when you delete it, it becomes what's called tombstone, which is a state where the object still exists behind the covers, but it doesn't show up. And most importantly, when you tombstone it or delete it, most of the attributes get stripped except for a handful. And you can undelete something that's a tombstone today, but when you get it back, it'll be missing most of those attributes. And on a fresh 2003 or 2008 forest, that's a 180-day period where it stays there as a tombstone. And that's something else you can configure. If you've got a forest that was built on Windows 2000, for example, that's actually 60 days by default. And then finally, when that 180-day period expires, the object is actually so-called garbage collected, where it's actually physically deleted from the database, and it's gone for good at that point. So once we introduce R2, 2008 R2 that is, and enable the recycle bin feature, we get this fourth state, which is injected between the live object and the deleted object, which is what we call a recycled object. And when an object's in the recycle bin, it can actually be taken out, like I was saying, and restored with all the attributes. And by default, that's an 180-day window before it becomes a traditional tombstone. Something to note with these intervals, if you have a legacy forest that was built on Windows 2000, for example, and you haven't changed that 60-day tombstone window, recycled objects or objects that are in the recycle bin actually will only stay there for 60 days. You can configure the two time slots differently for objects in the recycle bin and for tombstones once you upgrade to R2. And then finally, like before, after that second window, the object will get deleted. Couple things to note with this, especially if you're a large organization that's using Active Directory integrated DNS. You'll probably see some growth in your Active Directory database size here, because one notable thing that's going to be retained is all the DNS data every time a record gets updated or deleted. So something to keep in mind as you're planning for this, because this is something that you turn on a per forest basis rather than a per application partition or per domain. Couple questions I see rolling through. What forest or domain functional level? This is a 2008 R2 forest functional level feature. So that would be FFL4, with 2008 being 3 and 2003 being 2. Other questions we have, are backlinks restored as well? Yes. So if you delete something that's in a group, for example, or it's set to the manager of something, when you restore that object, all the membership will be retrieved. The links are actually just deactivated, so to speak, in the Active Directory database. And so in R2, tombstone objects are now called deleted objects. Let's come back to that question. Can the recycle bin be used by delegated junior admins? Out of the box, no. This requires the same privileges to reanimate a tombstone. So let's go to the next slide. So a couple new terms. So a deleted object is something that is currently in the recycle bin. And if you're looking at the previous slide, the labels are reversed, and I apologize for that. And a recycled object is what we used to call a tombstone. So after the 60 to 180 days, or whatever interval you pick, where the object's in the recycle bin and it leaves the recycle bin and becomes a traditional tombstone, then it's what we call a recycled object. So like I said, this is an R2 Forest functional level feature, and also if you're using Atom or ADLDS or Active Directory, Lightweight Directory Services, whatever you want to call it, they have this concept now of application modes for each partition that you're hosting. And when you upgrade an existing Atom environment or ADLDS to R2, you'll need to raise that partition to the R2 application mode in order to use the recycle bin. And then finally, this is an optional feature. So when you raise the Forest functional level, unlike in previous OSs, the recycle bin doesn't become automatically enabled. And this is interesting because this is some new work that was done in 2008 R2 to make rolling forest and domain functional level upgrades back reversible. And this is really important, certainly working with a lot of customers that have change control. You know, one of the big questions you get asked when you're filling out a change control form is, can I reverse this change, or how do I back it up? Back it out, I'm sorry. And prior to R2, the answer is always no, you can't back it out. And this just tends to give a huge heart attack to change control people. So starting with R2, you can actually back out of a forest functional level upgrade, with the important thing being that you haven't enabled the recycle bin yet. In R2, the recycle bin is the only so-called optional feature, but moving forward, that'll probably change with future OSs. So what I want to do is a quick demo here, and Catherine, if you could swap me to the other presenter. Perfect. Let me switch machines, and I'm going to share my desktop. Alrighty. So folks can see the PowerShell editor window. Laura says perfect, so I'm going to take that as yes. So what we're going to do here is a few things. I have a 2008 R2 Forest where the recycle bin is not enabled, so we're going to enable it and look at what happens when we need to use it to restore something. So the first things first, I guess this is the new PowerShell IDE or integrated scripting environment. It gives you a nice little editor for editing PowerShell scripts. And the recycle bin from a user interface perspective is only exposed by a PowerShell, you know, or other programming APIs. There will not be a user interface for this in the new ADUI or any of the existing user interfaces that ship with Active Directory. So the first thing we need to do is import the PowerShell commandlets that Active Directory uses, and there's this commandlet called import module, which basically tells PowerShell, check this library for the commandlets we're calling. So if we run that, it'll take a minute to load the module, and while we're doing that, the next command will actually list all the optional features that are defined in AD. And when we run this on an R2 Forest, we'll see that the only one currently is the Active Directory recycle bin. So scrolling up, a couple interesting things here. You know, it's a per forest feature, and it requires that we're in the R2 functional mode. And then this is disableable attribute says false, which means once this is turned on, we can't turn it off. So this is kind of going back to that change control thing. We don't have a complete new picture here where we can back anything out. This is a one-way operation. And then it's enabled on a per forest basis. So I've provided the name of my forest root domain here and the scope of forest. And if we run this, I'm going to get a prompt, are you sure you want to do this? Which is nice. This is a one-way operation, so we're really sure. So I'm going to say yes. It warns me that this is an irreversible action, and now it's done. So at this point, we've got the recycle bin running, and anything I delete will actually get saved in there. So what I'm going to do is I have a terminal server that I'm just going to use as an example, and I'm going to accidentally delete it here in Active Directory using computers, so a fairly common scenario. And at this point, if I try and remote desktop to it, I'm going to get a couple of errors. And traditionally at this point, what your choices are either to rejoin this machine to the domain, which could be a big deal, or to do an authoritative restore from an offline backup, which is no small encounter. So right here, it's telling me the certificate errors, which is normal. The encryption is going to fail. And when I try to log on, it tells me that it doesn't have a computer account anymore because I deleted it. So with the recycle bin, first thing I can do is I can do a get AD object and then search the deleted objects container, which is still where things that are in the recycle bin live. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because the only thing I've deleted is this, and get all the computers that are in the recycle bin. And finally, I'm going to ask it for the last known parent property, which tells me where that object used to live in AD before it was moved to deleted objects. And finally, include deleted objects tells it to add that LDAP control that returns deleted objects. So if we run that, here's my server that I deleted. It's currently in the deleted objects container. And we can run the same commandlet now, except rather than piping it to format list, which gives us this nice output format, I can pipe it to restore-AD object, which will actually remove it from the recycle bin and bring it back to life. So if I run that, it's successful, and we try remote desktop one more time. It logs in perfectly for me. So there is no reboot required for the server. The password came back, and it took a matter of seconds for me to solve this. A couple interesting things here. The commandlets here aren't recursive or hierarchical. So if you delete a tree, you can't just run this get AD object and pipe it to restore AD object and get everything back. There's an Active Directory recycle bin guide on TechNet in beta form, and it includes in one of the appendixes at the end a script that will actually do a tree undelete, so to speak, from the recycle bin. So if, let's say, you delete an OU for a whole department or a whole region, call it the Americas OU or something, you can run this script and retrieve that. A couple other things, you can certainly have multiple objects in the recycle bin that have the same name at one point or another. That's why we append this GUID on the end of the object GUID to make the RDN of the object unique. And I am going to switch out of here and see if we have any other recycle bin questions before I move on. Okay, Don asks, is it possible to see items in the recycle bin and choose the one to restore? So there is no user interface or like Active Directory users and computers for the recycle bin. So you're stuck using some sort of LDAP capable tool that can load the necessary LDAP controls. We just use the PowerShell to do that, but you can certainly use something like ADFind or LDP, LDIFDE, actually not LDIFDE, but LDP or ADFind for certain. To get those, just the same way you would look at a tombstone or a deleted object today. Any other recycle bin questions before I move on? Perfect. Okay, so next one, new managed service accounts functionality. Today service accounts are a big hole for most organizations I work with. You set the password when you create the account. Some people reuse the accounts for multiple things, and over time you can just get this massive number of people that know the passwords for service accounts, which may have extra privileges, and it's a huge security hole. And then also, there's often no life cycle for service accounts. Certainly when an employee gets terminated, their account hopefully gets deleted sometime soon. But if they know service account passwords, for example, those accounts keep going on. some organizations have policies that I've worked with where they actually rotate the passwords for service accounts. But most folks don't, and then that's fairly laborious, I guess that's a word, to actually get that working across all the servers that are using the service account. So managed service accounts are another new R2/Windows 7 feature, so you can use them in Windows 7 clients too. And what you get here is an object in AD that corresponds to a service account on a machine, and the passwords are managed automatically by the system. They run over the same secure channel that a computer rotates its password, and if you actually look at the new managed service account class in the AD schema, it's actually a subclass of a computer, so you can think of it as a special type of computer account in one way. So passwords are managed automatically by the system, and as long as you have a R2 or Win 7 machine and the R2 schema extensions, you can start using this. So this doesn't require 2008 R2 domain controllers or a specific domain or forest functional level. If you want it to manage spins for you, service principal names, so those are the Kerberos attributes of the account that does require that the domain is at the 2008 R2 functional level. The cool thing here is that if a machine's FQDN changes, fully qualified domain name, or the name of the machine changes or something like that, the service account can actually update its own Kerberos service principal names, which today is a manual task that often is kind of a contention point, especially in large organizations, for who's going to be responsible for that. And then finally, this is something you can use with the Service Control Manager, so that's where all the services live, and with application pools in the new version of IIS. The big hole here, of course, is the task scheduler. It does not support this right now. So you're still stuck using passwords that are manually set there. From an architectural perspective, managed service accounts have to be mapped one-to-one between a machine and account. So, for example, if you have a service like, say, SQL with replication where you need the same service account on multiple machines, that's not a scenario with that a managed service account can address, because there's no way for the machines to keep in sync with the passwords when they change. Any questions about managed service accounts before I move forward? Okay.
Brian,
Sorry,
did you see the questions? There were a couple about recycle bins still. Do you want to hold those off until later?
Yeah, let's hold those for later. So I don't want to get people confused,
okay,
bouncing around topics. Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, so offline domain joins. This is kind of a weird feature in that my personal opinion is that it's pretty narrow on what who it's going to be useful for. But I figure we should cover it so that there's no, there's a lot of confusion as to what this is useful for or where I should use it. So today, if you join the domain, you need to have network connectivity to do the actual domain join, and then you also need to reboot the machine. For the most part, that's fine, but take a scenario where, let's say, you're provisioning hundreds or even thousands of machines at once, particularly virtual machines if you're scaling out a data center. That's a lot of extra requirements, especially if you want to provision these machines and have them come up almost instantly in the domain ready to do their work. So offline domain join is the new feature that will enable that. And what happens is you can pre-provision computer accounts in AD with a password and use a utility called djoin.exe, and it kicks out this file, which is it's just base64 encoded, and it has a bunch of data about the computer, basically everything it needs to join the domain, and most importantly, it has the computer's machine password. And these aren't encrypted or anything. There's not really a way to do that without sharing the key somehow. So you got to treat these files really like they're really important, right? Because they have a password to access the domain. And then you use djoin.exe again to inject the info into the machine while it's offline. And that's the important one, right? Like you can't do this on an online machine. It sticks a bunch of data in the registry, and that's what the machine reads next time it boots. So really early in the boot process, it reads this data that we've injected in the registry and makes all the changes it needs to be in the domain. And since it does this early enough, it doesn't need to reboot for those to become effective. I think I have one more point. I just totally lost my train of thought on this. So virtual machines in particular, this is kind of cool. You can mount the virtual hard disk or the VMDK if you're a VMware person. Run the tool and point it at the mounted Windows directory. That's all you point it at, and it'll make the changes to the VM. You unmount the hard drive and boot it up in the VM platform, and it comes up in the domain straight away. If you're used to doing unattended installs, you can also store this this blob, as they're calling it, the stuff that that the djoin utility spits out in the unattended build script that Windows Setup reads, and it will read it in the during setup, and again the machine will come up in the domain. A couple questions. Is this Win 7 client only? This is a Win 7 client or 2008 R2 feature. It doesn't require anything as far as AD is concerned. It's just a client-side or server-side feature. Tony asks, so how does the injection take place? So when we mount the hard disk, let's say we're using a VM and we mount it offline, what actually happens is the tool is going to mount the registry hives that are in that machine and inject a bunch of data into the registry in special places. And then when the machine boots, it checks that data that's been injected and puts itself in the domain. But it already has the password, it already has domain controller info, domain info, etc., so it doesn't actually have to generate any network traffic for this to succeed. And is this tool compatible with WinPE? Yes, I believe so. I'm not 100% on that, so let me get back on that one. How do we tell the machine to read the file? So there's a utility called djoin.exe that we're going to run and point it at the file and also point it at the machine that's going to do the offline domain join. And remember, the machine's offline, so you need to have some sort of access to the Windows folder on that machine. How does it work on a physical server? This is not something you would do on a one-off physical server. I believe actually there are switches to do it quasi-online. Let's run this real quick. Djoin. So, I mean, again, this is something for provisioning, machines before they come up, not something that's online. It's meant for scale more than one-offs. And with that, I think I am going to turn the rest of this over to Laura to cover the rest of the features before we do a general Q&A. Laura?
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Brian. We can make me the presenter quickly. We can start moving along. And I'm going to move us to our next slide. Can someone confirm for me that they just saw their slides advance?
Yep.
Anyone? First one to answer me wins a prize.
Yeah, you're good, Laura.
Sweet. Thank you. Haven't decided what that prize is yet, but, I'll get back to you. So anyway, we're going to start our second half by talking about a new feature that's been introduced in 2008 R2 that's called Authentication Mechanism Insurance. Now, that title's a bit of a mouthful. I just tripped over it. But it really does describe exactly what's going on here, which is that it's a new feature that allows you to restrict access to resources not just based on the identity of the user who's accessing it, but by the mechanism that they use to authenticate on your network. Let's think of an example of this. Say you've got a folder share that contains the source code for your company's software. Say you're a major software company based in the Redmond, Washington area, and you decide that you only want to grant access to this folder to people who have authenticated using a smart card. Now, in 2000 AD, 2003 AD, 2008, I've got no way to do this. I can validate that Bob is who he claims to be because he's got a valid curb ticket from having authenticated to my domain. but I have no way of looking at Bob's security token and determining whether he authenticated using a smart card or just using a username and password. So how does the Auth mechanism assurance solve this problem? Kind of a clever thing, really. First of all, to implement this, we assume, once again, that you're at the 2008 R2 Forest functional level. We're also assuming that you've already got a smart card infrastructure deployed. What happens then is that you, the administrator, will map a certificate OID to a universal security group. So your high assurance cert OID can get mapped to one security group, your medium assurance cert OID gets mapped to another group, and so on. Now, once you've created these mappings, you don't actually need to glom users into or out of these security groups yourself. What happens is when a user logs in using their smart card, Windows will check their login certificate and see if it has an OID that matches one of these mappings you've created. If it finds one, it will then inject the SID of that corresponding security group into that user's token. So say Bob authenticates with a username and password, he'll get all of the groups in his token that either you or Windows have made him a member of. He's a member of domain users, litware users, full-time employees, and let's say marketing. But if Bob then authenticates using a smart card, and his smart card contains a cert OID that you've mapped to a security group, this will need to be a universal security group, then he's not only a member of domain users, litware users, FTEs, and marketing, but he's now automatically also made a member of, say, the high assurance cert universal security group that you had created and mapped to correspond to this OID. So he logs on with a smart card, that group appears in his token. He logs on with just a username and password, say he's logging in using Outlook Web Access from an internet cafe. That group does not appear in his token because he hasn't logged in using a smart card. And so he won't be able to access any resources that have been secured based on that group. And all of this, again, gets handled automatically by Active Directory based on these mappings that you create between these certificate OIDs and these universal security groups. So that's how it works. And again, it's really kind of a clever concept. The challenge is going to be in actually implementing it. From a practical standpoint, I see this being used predominantly in something like an AD federated services application, rather than being used to secure more traditional file and folder shares. The reason for that is because I think the way that most organizations are going to want to use this is going to require the use of what's effectively a multi-step authorization policy. You might also think of this as a compound ACL. So I'm going to want to grant access to a resource if you are a member of the marketing group and if you are a member of the high assurance cert group. Now, most of you are already thinking in the back of your brain that NTFS ACLs don't actually work that way. If I'm a member of either of these security groups, I'm going to get access to that resource because NTFS ACLs are using what's called a logical OR. If you're a member of Group 1, or if you're a member of Group 2, or if you're a member of Group 3, you're going to be granted access to this resource. Whereas if we use something like a custom-built ASP.NET web application, like you might see in an ADFS deployment, then we could actually make use of these kinds of compound authorization decisions. Only grant access to this web page if the user is presenting both the marketing claim and the high assurance cert claim. I think it's a great idea any way you look at it. I think it's really a very interesting step forward from a security perspective. It's just going to become a question of requiring some thought around actually implementing it in a useful manner, and as always, seeing if the third-party applications can catch up with what we're trying to do. Let's see, questions, reading back. Mapping only to groups, what types? The universal security groups. So you'd make a security group called domain admin smart card login and only assign full permissions there. Sure, that's certainly going to be one way to do it. I think one way that you could conceivably use this feature to secure something more traditional like files and folders would be if you had a one-to-one mapping between certificate OIDs and every single group that you would want to use to restrict this access. So you would have a group for marketing with a high assurance cert. You'd have another group for marketing with a medium assurance cert. You'd have another group for sales with a high assurance cert. Another group for sales with a medium assurance cert. And I mean, while it's technically possible, you can see how it has implications when it comes to scaling. Because, let's take marketing as an example. They're always my favorite example. I'm not sure why. But let's say that we've got a guy in marketing who is in one particular role in marketing where he's been issued a medium assurance cert, and he gets promoted, so he now needs a high assurance cert. Well, all of a sudden I've got to reissue his smart card because if I'm doing this one-to-one mapping so that I can use Auth mechanism assurance against NTFS, against an NTFS file system, I've got this one-to-one mapping thing going on that may or may not scale very well. But again, it's a really interesting, it's an interesting premise. I think it's a really cool piece of functionality. It's just a question of seeing how the apps that are already out there are going to react to it. So moving along to one of the new features, much like Recycle Bin, that's gotten a lot of airtime, which is the new set of Active Directory commandlets for PowerShell v2 that now comes built into the operating system. Now, if this were a live event, I'd be asking for a show of hands right now to see who's already familiar with PowerShell, who's already working with it. But since I obviously can't quite do that here, I can't quite see all of you from where I'm sitting. We'll start with just sort of a rapid-fire PowerShell level set and then launch into a demo. So pretty much every single Microsoft product at this point is moving towards PowerShell as the standard for command line management. And one of the reasons for this is because it gives you a very standardized syntax, regardless of what product or what platform you're managing. You can contrast this with trying to learn the syntax of repadmin, which has nothing to do with the syntax of dsadd, which has nothing to do with the syntax of DNSCMD, and we're not even going to talk about AD-find at this point, so on and so forth. Now architecturally, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, one of the things that can catch people a little bit off guard is that this new PowerShell module actually communicates with Active Directory through a web service. And no, this doesn't mean that you're loading IIS on your domain controllers because, well, I would never allow that to happen. This is a very specific purpose-built web service that comes loaded on an R2 domain controller. It's not even actually using HTTP traffic. It's just using a TCP socket. And we'll see more on the web service in a minute. So again, one of the main advantages with PowerShell when you're managing any platform, not just AD, is going to be this consistency of its syntax. Any well-written PowerShell commandlet that's managing any product is going to adhere to what's called a verb-noun syntax, which means it's going to read as get dash something, set dash something, clear dash something. You're going to start with the verb, what do I want to do? And then you're going to include the noun, which is the thing that I want to get or set or clear or create a new one of. PowerShell is also object-based, which means that I can call a command like getADuser, and rather than just getting back, say, like a list of strings of the user's DNs, I get back a collection of actual objects, one for each user, that I can then pipe into another commandlet. So, for example, I might want to get a collection of users that meet a certain criteria. They haven't changed their password in 120 days. And then I want to take that collection of objects and then pipe that collection into another commandlet do something to each of those objects, like, for example, disable AD user. So, again, getting back to the overall architecture, I touched on the fact that there's now an AD web service that PowerShell actually uses to communicate with AD when it's making its changes. And you're going to see this illustrated here. In 2008 AD, and this applies for 2003 and 2000 as well, you have user-facing tools like AD users and computers, the command line tools, LDAP tools like LDP. These are communicating directly with, .NET protocols like SBS protocols, SDS Active Directory, account management. And with the current version of PowerShell, when I say current, I'm talking about PowerShell v1, since PowerShell v2 and the AD module are still in beta. So the current version of PowerShell, PowerShell v1, is actually going to communicate with Active Directory using these same mechanisms. Whereas when 2008 R2 ships, you can see that Microsoft have now created this layer of abstraction between some of the deep, dark .NET layers like SDS protocols, which, frankly, I'm an administrator, I barely understand them, and we're now channeling requests through this AD web service. When we talk about the AD Administrative Console in a couple of minutes, this tool is also going to be leveraging the AD web service. Now, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Ask about it on the activedir.org mailing list and watch the sparks fly. But this is pretty much the direction that they're taking moving forward. That this is going to be the layer of abstraction that tools like PowerShell and like ADAC are going to be using to interface with Active Directory. It's going to be available. It comes out of the box on 2008 R2. 2008 R2 DCs. It's going to be backported, from what I understand, to 2008 and probably 2003. And there's also going to be a new DC locator flag that's going to indicate whether or not an individual DC is listening on this web service. And I see one comment, only in computerese is new a verb. Yes, indeed, very funny. We like making up our own language in computer science. So anyway, pretty pictures are fine, but let's actually see some of this in action. Bear with me for just one moment while I share out my demo machine. And you should be seeing my PowerShell window with AD users and computers sitting in the background. So what we want to start out with is, let's say we want a list of all of the new AD commandlets. Easiest way to do this with any set of commandlets is going to be with get-command. And I can tell you that all of the AD commandlets are going to be in the syntax of something-AD something. So get AD group, set AD user, and so forth. So you want to see a list of the new commandlets. I've scrolled by a couple of screens. There's quite a bit of them. And there you go. That's the list of the new AD commandlets for you. And you want some instant PowerShell documentation. You want a really quick way to generate a help file for all of these commands at once. We're going to start with that same command, get command *-AD star. We're going to pipe that to get help full, which is basically just a verbose flag. We're going to pipe that to help.text. And we hold our breath and make sure that it works, because it worked every time I went through it before I actually went live. And here you can see we've got a nice big help file detailing the syntax and the parameters of every single AD commandlet that's available in this module. Now, something kind of subtle that just happened here that I want to call out, which is if there are any true PowerShell believers watching right now, they're probably yelling at me through their laptop screens, because the way that I just typed that to a file that greater than help.text, That's actually DOS syntax. That's just left over from, DOS command line and DOS batch file windows. It just happens to be the thing that I've been using for 15 years, so it's what I remember. So a real PowerShell guy is going to tell you that what I should have done is to take the get dash command, pipe that to get help, and then pipe that to out file. But you can see that the DOS redirect command worked just fine, and I was able to intersperse PowerShell with old school command line syntaxes all on one line, and the world did not actually come to an end. Now, Brian and I are both consultants, so we walk into a lot of environments that we've never seen before, and we want a quick and dirty way to get a really high-level snapshot of an AD environment. So get AD root desi. Anyone who's ever connected to root desi in LDP, that should look really familiar to you. Get-AD domain. Get-AD domain. Let me give it the name of my domain. And this gives me just kind of a quick hit overview of some of the attributes of the domain head. I get the infrastructure master. I get the GUID of group policies that have been applied at the domain level. Let's see, what else do I get? I get the domain SID. I get the object GUID. I get PDC emulator. I get the RIB master. I get the name of my default computers container. You can see I'm still throwing all of my computers to the CN equals computers. I haven't redirected it anywhere. By the same token, get-AD forest gives me both of my forest-wide FSMOs, gives me a list of sites. I've only configured the one because this is a cheapy little VM that I just threw up for this demo. And then along the same lines, there's get the default domain password policy, and that throws out all of the relevant details surrounding my default password policy. Now let's stop for a second and talk about that last commandlet. Get-AD default domain password policy. You saw that come up on the console really quickly, and believe it or not, I don't actually type that fast. The names of a lot of these AD commandlets are pretty long, and that tells me that the guys who are developing these are fairly positive that you're going to be using the tab complete feature religiously, which for those of you who haven't worked in PowerShell is you type the first few letters of a PowerShell commandlet and you just start hitting tab and it starts auto-completing. And if there's more than one possible command that would match that auto-complete, it just cycles through them. I think the longest commandlet I've seen while working with these is, where is it? There it is. Get-AD account resultant password replication policy. If you ever have to actually type that anywhere, I really do feel for you. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the discoverability aspect of PowerShell. Maybe you just haven't learned that much about PowerShell yet, and now you're saying, yeah, now's the time. I'm an AD guy, so this AD module is here. I'm going to sit down and figure this out. Discoverability is what lets you run a PowerShell commandlet interactively, even if you've never run it before and if you don't know the right command line switches. So, let's say that we're in my AD domain and we want to create a couple of new organizational units. Now, I know that the standard PowerShell nomenclature is going to be new-something. Yes, I know, new isn't a verb. Work with me here. And I know that the AD module is going to use new-AD something. So we're going to use the autocomplete. We're going to say new-AD. No, don't want computer. Don't want that. Don't want that. Might want that. We'll put a pin in it and come back to it. New AD organizational unit. And we're just going to hit enter. And here's where you see discoverability at work. I didn't give it any command line parameters whatsoever. I just typed the name of the commandlet and hit enter. Now it's asking me for the name of the OU I want to create. I'm going to say we want to create an OU called sales. I hit enter and poof, I'm done. And just to show you that there's nothing up my sleeve, we go back to ADUC, we hit refresh, and there's my sales OU. And you can see that it dropped it into the root of the domain since I didn't tell it anything other than the name, so it's just going to default to there. So now let's try creating one without waiting for that prompting so that, we can take a full command and stuff it into a script and make it repeatable. If you want to see some quick examples of most of the PowerShell commandlets, not just the AD ones, we again go back to our good old get help, and we use the example switch. A lot of stuff's going to scroll past you, but typically the last thing you see up here is going to give you as much information as you probably need to get going. So we're going to create another OU. We're going to give it the name of marketing. And we want to create a child OU, so we're going to create it under the name marketing. I'm sorry, we already created marketing. We don't want to do that again. And again, just nothing up my sleeve. We go back to ADUC. There's marketing. There's managers. Okay, so now we're done creating. OUs. Let's. If I could type. Let's talk about creating groups. So we'll try new AD group. There you go. We hit enter. Discoverability at work again. What's a group scope? I tell it global. Okay, it's throwing back red text at me. Clearly they're still working on the discoverability aspect on this particular commandlet. It's still in a beta. We give them a little bit of rope to hang themselves with. But you can see in the error message that what it's complaining about is the SAM account name. So that probably gives us enough to go on. And of course I already created that group because this is what happens when you try doing a demo twice on one machine. And so we've created a group called marketing. We go to the users container, which is where it's going to land by default. You can see that we've just created a group. Now we're going to try adding some members to it. Add AD group member. First thing it wants is the identity of the group. Marketing, users, DC equals litware, DC equals com. It wants the members we want to add, and these are user objects that I've already created. So I'm actually going to cancel out of there because I just realized I typoed that DN. All right, we want a member. We're going to add me. We're going to add Brian. And it's just going to keep asking me for more. I only have 2 that I want to add, so I'm just going to hit enter. It's going to break out of the loop. We go back to ADUC. We look at the marketing group. We look at members. And there are my 2 new members. Now one thing I have noticed, and again I chalk this up to a beta, is that in the current build, if I try to add a group member who is already in the group, as in here I'm trying to add myself to this group and I'm already in this group, it's going to error out on me. Now the error message is fairly intuitive. It's pretty obvious what's going on, but I think that should fail a little bit more gracefully. We'll see what happens when it hits RTM. So anyway, we could spend all day looking at this. It's fun, but there's a few more things that we want to show off while we still got the time. So give me just a moment to clear on out of my remote desktop window. I see the chat window is going crazy, so I probably have a lot waiting for me. We're going to stop sharing. And now we should be back at my slides. Alrighty, let's look at some of the questions that we have. Are the AD commandlets only available on V2 or also on V1? The module is only shipping with V2. I haven't heard anything about it being backported to V1. Brian, have you heard anything about that?
No, as far as I know, there'll be a V2 only feature. If you want to use something similar in V1, I would look at the Frequest commandlets.
Yeah, we have there's a number of commandlets that are available that the community has developed that will run on PowerShell v1. One of them, as Brian mentioned, is are the Quest commandlets. If you go to the Quest website, there is about, I'd say, a dozen maybe, possibly more, of commandlets that they've created, and they're actually all in the syntax of get-qad user, set-qad user, very traditional PowerShell syntax, and they actually work very similarly to the AD commandlets that you're going to be seeing with v2. Let's see, as Laura mentions, these PS commands are long. Obviously, tab complete is wonderful. However, what about the certification exams? I have not, for myself, seen any coverage of PowerShell on the certification exams. I haven't actually seen that myself. I can't imagine that they would ask you to type massive long things. Typically, it's a matter of recognizing commandlets that are shown to you, for example. So, you might need to distinguish between what two different PowerShell commandlets look like. I don't work for MSL. I'm not an MSL guy. I can't really speak to that. But I imagine that any PowerShell coverage you see on the cert exams would probably take into account the way that normal people are going to be using PowerShell, which is going to be lots and lots of tab completion. So I'm actually seeing a question on auth assurance. We're going to circle back to that one at the end. Any other PowerShell questions before we move on along here?
Or I think a couple points to make. As far as PowerShell goes, in 2008 today, you cannot use that on a server core OS because the .NET framework doesn't ship or run on Windows Server Core. With 2008 R2, that has changed, and you can use PowerShell on Server Core. Then the other question I see here: do AD commandlets have default aliases like dir and ls? Laura, do you want to touch on the provider for a minute as far as the file system-like navigation?
Yes, thank you. That's another component that's being added to the AD module, which is those of you who are already familiar with PowerShell are probably familiar with the notion of providers, which, for example, there's a provider for the registry that allows you to CD and dir within the registry, like within HKey local machine, as though it were the file system. Like you could start at HKey local machine and CD into system, just like you were CDing into a subfolder. And that is another feature that's going to be available. Excuse me, when the AD module ships. It's near as I can figure, it's fully functional in the beta right now. The syntax is the syntax is out there. It's again fully discoverable. But you can CD into an organizational unit. You can do a dir and list the contents of an OU. Brian and I are slightly worried that this is going to increase the risk of accidental deletions because you CD into an OU that you didn't mean to. But that's what the recycle bin is for at the end of the day. All right, so is V2 going to remain free, or is there going to be a license cost assigned now? I have heard nothing whatsoever about making PowerShell a for-fee product. I imagine if that were coming, we would hear it being screamed loudly from the rooftops. So,
yeah, and that's,
again,
it's bundled pretty deeply into the OS
at
this
I've
point.
heard nothing to that effect. All right, so moving along, the last major thing that we're going to cover is the new AD Administrative Center, ADAC, which is the new PowerShell-based GUI administration tool. And much like the PowerShell module, ADAC is again leveraging that AD web service in order to make its calls back into the directory. AD users and computers isn't gone in this release. You just saw me using it. But you're going to see that ADAC has some really interesting improvements to it, and it's definitely the direction that the product group are moving to in terms of the AD administration tools. And so what they've done with ADAC is they basically started over from the ground up, and they've built a whole new administrative tool that's based on PowerShell. Any of you who have an Exchange background You've already seen the Exchange team do this in Exchange 07, where the new Exchange manager is basically just front-ending a bunch of PowerShell commandlets that are happening in the background. Now with the Exchange tool, it even spits out that PowerShell syntax that it's using, so if you wanted to repeat whatever command you just issued into a script, you can copy and paste that PowerShell and just bop it off into your own PowerShell scripts. ADAC isn't quite there yet. That's something that everyone who sees it immediately asks for. But I know that it's one of the goals that that folks who are developing it are going for as far as it's concerned. As you're going to see in a second, one of the major goals with ADAC was to make it more task-based. Rather than just showing you a literal picture of the OU structure. It also supports administering multiple domains, multiple forests, from one unified task pane. So give me just one moment to load my VM back up, and we will see ADAC in action. I'll get out of PowerShell because we don't need that anymore. I'll get out of ADAC because we don't need that anymore. And so what we're seeing here, again, this is the AD Administrative Center. This is ADAC. You're going to see that it's kind of a big leap visually from what you're used to seeing in AD users' computers, but at the same time, it's still very discoverable, and I think it's actually fairly easy to make the transition from one to the other. It's not like all the rules have suddenly changed on you. And we start with the overview pane, which is the thing that you see when you first open up ADAC. And you can see how it's trying to be more task-based and thus friendlier to delegated administrators. Let's say you've got one of those help desks that's very prototypical. They spend half their day resetting passwords. Well, now rather than having to drill down to whatever OU the user is in, or rather than having to search for the user, they just have this pane available to them right at the outset of ADAC that will allow them to reset a password. And you can see down here, it's telling me exactly what it's about to do. The password is about to be reset for /Brian Desmond. I can flag it to user must change it next login. If his account were locked, which it isn't at this point, I would have the option to unlock. I can apply that password change, and it tells me exactly what I just did. User account option has been changed. Password has been changed. We also have a search window if I want to quickly look up a particular object. I have lots of L hunters, feeling fairly narcissistic when I wrote up this demo. So we go back to the overview pane, and you can also see down here we have our Getting Started tab, which has links out to a lot of different resources, the AD forum that's out on TechNet, web links for PowerShell resources, things along those lines. So the next thing we're going to look at is what they call the progressive discoverability within ADAC that allows you to browse through even a really complex directory tree in a very intuitive way. We're going to start at the top level of the domain, which is litware, and we're going to click on on this right-facing triangle, and what's going to fly out is a list of all of the top level OUs. And so you can see this North America OU is one that I've already created for this demo. And if I want to keep drilling down, I keep going to my right arrows, and I keep drilling down further and further into the directory tree in a way that makes it very easy to, okay, I've gotten out to Philadelphia. Wait, I didn't actually want to go here. I actually wanted to be in New Jersey. This lets me just backtrack and click back to where I wanted to be without having to do a lot of scrolling back and forth and maybe losing my place in where I was. Now, there's two things I wanted to point out here that are kind of subtle but that are kind of nice. Is that, for example, once I select a particular OU, let's select that one. Now, I don't have any object in this OU, but just say for sake of example that I did. Two things to notice here is, one, that OU that I've selected has just been hyperlinked to what is effectively a most recently used list. The thinking being, if I went there once, I'm going to want to go there again at some point. And I could click back there, and it would get me directly to the same place. Or if I started to go through the navigation again, that flyout menu is going to automatically take me right back to the last place I was. Again, if I went there once, odds are I'm going to want to go there again. But as you select different OUs, if you watch the left-hand pane here, you'll see that most recently used list is going to keep updating itself as any MRU list will. Let's say that we wanted to create a more permanent shortcut to, say I'm a delegated admin and I have responsibility for the Pennsylvania and the New Jersey OUs. Well, I've already done Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Let's do Connecticut, for example. So I go up here and I click on Add Navigation Nodes. And I apologize if this is too wide for you to see it on the screen. Hopefully you'll mostly get the idea. Let's say that I have administrative authority over marketing and New Hampshire. Seems an odd combination, but we'll go with it. We click OK, and these are added to the left-hand pane so that I can just browse straight to them. And even if I close ADAC and reopen it, as I twiddle my thumbs waiting for ADAC to reload, you can see that all of my navigational nodes in the right-hand pane and my most recently used list are still sitting there waiting for me. Now, just like PowerShell, we could spend all day on this, but I'm conscious of time. I want to see if we can get to some questions. Just to give you another taste of the new interface, let's look at creating a new user. For example, we'll go to Vermont. Oh, that's a beautiful little error message that I wasn't expecting. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. What's the old rule? Do a demo, lose a sale. So we'll go to Philadelphia, shall we? And I'm going to click on New User. And this is the interface that you get when you go to create a new user object within ADAC. Now, what you're seeing here that you didn't really get creating the user in ADAC is that you can fill in at time of creation pretty much any field that you want to, rather than, most of us remember creating a user in ADAC. There's only a couple of fields that you can fill out. Then you have to save the user, go back in, reopen it, and edit it. So you've got a number of different sections, account section, organization, member of, and basically these sort of correspond to the old tabs that you used to have in ADAC. And you can fill all of these out at time of creation, or if you want to simplify this view, I can minimize these sections so that they don't show up by default. I can then choose to go back in and re-maximize them, or I can remove them entirely. I don't care about organization. I don't want my desktop cluttered up. I only want to fill out what's in this account tab, so I can actually just remove those sections entirely, and visually this is all I'm going to save. Again, if I wanted to put them back in, I can just go and reselect them. Now, we're not actually going to click through actually creating a user. We're going to go with the cooking school mentality here and show you one that's already been created. And this is mostly so that I can show you something that I thought was really slick when I first discovered it, which is, let's look at a user that's already been created. And you can see the view is very similar to when you were creating the user. But the thing I wanted to point out, because I think this is really slick, is if I click on this up arrow next to modified, I get this really quick hit look at a whole bunch of metadata associated with this object that really you could almost never see in ADUC before. I mean, it was there, but maybe you had to jump out to add the edit, or you had to go out to command line. Maybe you had to go to a couple of different tools for it. But you can, I can take a look at the when created field, the when modified field. It shows me the update sequence numbers, the GUID, the SID, my user account control settings. I've never logged on with this account, so these fields aren't terribly probative right now, but you can imagine in a production environment, shows me the last log on, shows me the number of times I've logged on, shows me my bad password count, my last bad log on. Just really cool stuff. And just one more quick little things to show you before we cut out for questions is the AD Best Practices Analyzer. The Exchange guys have had their Best Practices Analyzer for years and years, and I've always been really jealous. So now we have one of our very own. It's integrated into Server Manager, and much like the Exchange BPA, it'll run a series of health check tests on demand. And now this rule set that it's using for testing is going to be updated quarterly by Microsoft. You can see I'm non-compliant right now because I don't have 2 functioning domain controllers for redundancy. Of course I don't. It's a stupid little VM I threw up to do a demo. But you can also see under the Compliant tab, these are a number of tests that you might have envisioned needing to grep out of the output of a DC diag or something. So it's kind of like Mom Lite built right into Server Manager, and I think it's pretty slick. And with that, I am going to stop sharing out my desktop. And that takes us to the end of our demos. I'm going to turn back to Brian for just a minute. He's going to talk about his book. I'm going to talk about my book for a minute, and then we'll close it out with some questions and some conversations.
Okay, let's try this again. I was on mute. I'm sorry. I'm the author of Active Directory 4th edition from O'Reilly, hence the O'Reilly-hosted webcast. And just recently got this edition out in December with a ton of Windows Server 2008 coverage. Yeah, I'm not going to go through this list here. You can read it as well as I can read it too. But a really good chapter on read-only domain controllers in particular, I think. And as well as a ton of PowerShell stuff with relation to AD. And also, if you do a little bit of development work, or if you are a developer, we had Joe Kaplan of AD.NET Dev fame write the .NET chapter for us, and turned out really well. So I'd really encourage you to check it out if you don't own a copy. www.briandesmond.com /AD4. And I've got more coverage there, and certainly if you ever got a question, just hit the email me link. I'm certainly happy to hear from you. Laura?
Excellent, thank you, Brian. And again, this is the sister title to Brian's Active Directory is the AD Cookbook, which we've just revved up to the 3rd edition. If you're unfamiliar with the cookbook format, it's designed to be a very task-based format. You need to do a particular thing, like create a user. Here's how you do it in the GUI, here's how you do it with the command line, here's how you do it in a script, and now here's how you do it in PowerShell. In the 3rd edition, we've got, much like with Brian's title, we've got full coverage of Server 2008. We've got a full chapter on Exchange 07, as well as what I think is the only printed coverage I'm aware of at the moment for, excuse me, for Identity Lifecycle Manager 2007, and that's a very good chapter that was written by one of my fellow MVPs, and he's a competitor, but I don't hold that against him. Brad Turner of NSYNC. He did a really good job writing the ILM chapter for me. And with that, I'd say we're done talking. So we'll open the floor up to answer some questions. Like we mentioned at the outset, we've got a lot of folks in attendance. So if there's any questions we won't get to in time, we're going to collect them all, and we'll do our best to post the answers out for you on Brian's blog, on my blog, probably on the O'Reilly site somewhere.
Okay. So let's do this. Let me field a couple of the ADAC questions that rolled in while Laura was doing the demo, and then I know we got a bunch of would love to hear about it type things in the that folks put in the registration form. So I'm just going to skim through that list and kind of hit on some frequent flyers there. As far as ADAC goes, is there a tree view? Yeah, it's still there. It's kind of a hidden tab in the left pane above the list, and if you click that, you get a tree view, but it's not the default. Can you create customized ADACs like MMCs? So officially the answer is no. Unofficially the answer is all this stuff is stored in an XML file in your profile, so you can open it up and tinker with it, and should you figure out how to distribute it, you'll find that other ADACs will read it for you. So I guess yes but no is, or no but yes is the answer there. Is there an easy way to add custom sections in the user creation modification screens? No, and there will not be in this release. In fact, it actually will still host legacy ADUC tabs, but you won't be able to add new stuff to it. Kind of unfortunate, but it's a V1 product, and I think as that continues to grow, we'll see a lot of great things there. So let me skim through this list here. It's quite a long list. We've got a great turnout today. I've got a bunch of questions around upgrading from 2003 or 2008 to R2. The procedure is the same as other OS upgrades with relation to AD. The important thing here is that this is totally different than 2003 R2. Right? To go from 2003 to 2003 R2, we imported some schema extensions and popped CD2 into an existing Windows Server 2003 server, and suddenly we had R2. Windows Server 2008 R2 is a totally new OS. Sure, you can do an in-place upgrade like you've been able to do for forever with Windows, but it's not just some tack-on modules for the OS. So it's kind of the same procedure as let's say 2000 to 2003 or 2003 to 2008. If you've done that, we're going to run AD prep and run forest prep, domain prep, and potentially RODC prep, and then DC promo new 2008 R2 domain controllers into the domain, and then transfer FSMA rules and so forth, so you can demote older domain controllers. So pretty simple. Certainly if you've done a previous AD OS upgrade, it's pretty much the exact same procedure. Let's see here.
One thing I'll jump in while you're reading down the questions is we've got a couple of questions about read-only sysvol being a new feature that's being implemented with R2, and while neither Brian nor I touched on it today, it is something that is going to be released. At the moment, there are some customers who will deploy sysvol in a read-only fashion using some serious black magic of putting ACLs on one side rather than the other. Totally unsupported. If you call PSS, they'll laugh at you. But if you go out to the AskDS blog that's out on TechNet, look for a post dated like January 22nd or something, and you'll see a good detail of what they're calling read-only replicated folders, which is now an actual supported configuration. One thing again that and thank you, Mike, for nudging me about this, that neither Brian nor I mentioned, because I think we're both taking it for granted by this point, is the fact that 2008 R2 is going to be a 64-bit only release. There is not going to be a 32-bit version of 2008 R2. As most of you probably know, this started back in 2006-ish when Exchange 2007 released. Microsoft has been making the move to release 64-bit only editions of their products. So Exchange 2007 was a 64-bit only release. ILM 2, God, whatever it ships, is going to be 64-bit only, and 2008 R2 Server is going to be a 64-bit only release.
Alrighty. Couple other questions. Can you skip 2008, go straight from 2003 R2 to 2008 R2? Yes, definitely. You can go from 2000, 2003, or 2003 R2, or 2008 to 2008 R2. Does ADAC enable you to view Exchange attributes of objects? Not with a custom tab or anything. Have you seen a published release date for R2? That has not been announced. And will you be at TechEd in May? I know Laura will be. I probably will be, but have not made that commitment yet. But if I will be, and certainly Laura, we will be at the Active Directory Ask the Experts booths most of the week. So I'd love to see you there. Another question I got was about NTLM in the registration list. There's actually a new feature in Win7 and 2008 R2 that we didn't really talk about. where you can actually completely disable NTLM and only use Kerberos. There's a whole bunch of work that was done to make this possible. There's a new auditing event, so you can set group policies to audit any time NTLM is used. And there's a tool called Application Verifier, which if you're a developer you've probably heard of, but it has some new knobs in it to verify that an application isn't taking any NTLM dependencies. So those are the main ones I've got here. I know Brian Yuley wants to know about last logon timestamp in the PAS, and Brian, I'm going to IM you offline and talk about that one. So it's kind of a big discussion for 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think we're probably running out of time.
Are we out of time?
Well, unless you want to take one or two more quick questions. It's up to you.
Okay. No, I think unless anyone else has got another quick question that they want to drop in the window real quick, sounds like it's getting time for us to wrap up. This will be available as a recording online on YouTube, and that link just got posted in the chat window. Laura and I will both blog the PowerPoint for this. Certainly if you've got any questions that didn't come up, feel free to send me an email or Laura an email. We'd love to hear from you. Going to hit these two questions real quick. Any changes to Macintosh support? No. And back with Auth assurance, is it finally possible to have a single account? So Jeff wants to know if he could have a single admin account now. I suppose you could, but going back to that whole compound ACL thing, like out of the box, nothing's ACLed this way. So unless you're going to change all your default permissions on domain controllers and so forth, you're not really going to be able to have that single administrative account even with the Auth assurance. And finally, what was the name of the verifier application? It is called Application Verifier. That's the name of the tool that's available from Microsoft. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for coming. It was really great to have everyone here. I know I certainly enjoyed doing this, and I'm pretty sure Laura did as well. And we look forward to hearing from you soon again.
Great. I want to thank you both for doing such an excellent job today, and thank you everyone else for joining us. As I said, I'll send you a link once the recording is available, which will be early next week. And if you want to save the chat save the chat file, and a lot of people do, the best way to do it is just to click in that file, do select all, and copy and paste into a text file if there are some resources in there you wanted to save. So you should do that now because I'm about to close out the meeting. But thank you again, everyone, and I hope you'll join us for another webcast soon.
Okay, great. Everyone have a great day.
Okay.